Under the pale light of a dying sun, Yelena Markova knelt in the dust beside a half-built shelter, guiding her daughter's small hands over the knot of a lash cord. The wind carried a metallic tang from the nearby scrap fields, and her son, barely 10, scrambled over the frame with the easy balance of someone born to low gravity. They laughed when the cord slipped loose, and she laughed with them, though her eyes kept flicking to the horizon. On quiet worlds like Thalen's reach, trouble came without warning, and the old instincts she had tried to bury never truly dulled. She had promised herself this life would be different. No uniforms, no orders, no trail of bodies in her wake. Just a garden, a roof, and time to teach her children things that didn't involve survival at the edge of a rifle sight. Still, when a deep tremor shivered through the ground, her muscles tightened before her mind had even caught up. The sound followed, low at first, then swelling into a steady thunder that rattled the walls. Her son froze on the frame. Her daughter's eyes widened. Yelena rose slowly, scanning the sky. They came in formation, 6 black and gold carriers, angular and vast, blotting out the sun as they descended. Each ship bore the emblem she had hoped never to see again, a stylized spearhead wrapped in a ring of stars. The Galactic Armies had arrived. The colony's comms crackled to life with clipped alien commands, but she ignored them. She knew the protocol. Surrender, registration, and conscription. Those were the choices for most. For families, there was one more: integration. The word sounded benign to those who had never seen what it meant. She had. Integration stripped away culture, memory, sometimes even language. Children emerged, speaking the Empire's tongue and nothing else. They never came home. Her neighbors spilled into the open, caught between panic and disbelief. Some waved compliance banners, thinking it might spare them. Yelena didn't move until the first shuttle's landing gear crushed the earth a dozen meters away. The hatch opened with hydraulic precision. 4 soldiers emerged, their height exaggerated by rigid black armor with gold-trimmed edges. Their skin was the color of winter sky, their faces expressionless, their eyes dark as obsidian. Behind them strode an officer in a robe split for movement, a metallic sash marking command rank. "You are Yelena Markova," the officer said, his voice filtered through a translator clipped to his jaw. It flattened every word, stripping it of tone. She said nothing. "The children are to be taken for integration," he continued. "By order of the Central Command, Article 16, all human minors within this sector. They're not going anywhere," she cut in, her voice low but steady. The officer tilted his head slightly, as if noting an error in a calculation. "You will comply. Resistance will result in—" I said no. The soldiers shifted, weapons rising with silent coordination. Her son climbed down from the shelter frame, his face pale. Her daughter clutched the hem of Yelena's jacket. The wind dropped, leaving the air heavy with the thrum of the carriers overhead. Yelena's hands twitched toward the tools on her belt. Nothing more than a hammer and a blade, but in the right hands they could draw blood. She measured the distance to the nearest soldier. She could take him, maybe the second before the others fired, but her children were too close. The officer made a subtle gesture. 2 soldiers advanced. "Run," Yelena whispered, pushing her children toward the shelter. They didn't get far. One soldier caught her son by the collar. Another seized her daughter around the waist. Yelena moved without thinking, blade flashing, and the first guard's weapon clattered to the dirt. The second swung his rifle, but into her ribs. Pain detonated through her side, but she stayed upright. The officer didn't raise his voice. "Stun her." Blue light surged, and the ground vanished beneath her. When she woke, the sun had shifted. Smoke drifted from what had been her shelter. Her mouth was dry, her vision swimming, but the absence struck harder than the pain. The space where her children should have been. On the ground beside her lay a data slate, glowing with alien script. She didn't need to read it. The pictographs were enough. The children were property of the Galactic Armies now. She was forbidden to pursue them, under penalty of death. She sat in the dirt for a long time, staring at the horizon where the carriers had vanished. Her breath slowed. The pain in her ribs receded into a distant echo. In its place came something sharper, colder. She rose and walked into what remained of her home. Beneath the scorched floorboards, behind a panel only she knew how to open, lay a steel case sealed with her biometrics. The lock released with a muted hiss. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a battered set of armor that had seen a dozen campaigns. The plates were pitted, scorched, and patched with mismatched alloys, but they were hers. Beside them rested a sidearm that no human colony should have owned, and a long knife with a blackened grip. In the far corner of the case, a small containment unit stirred. She unlatched it, and a squat, muscular shape emerged, fur bristling, eyes bright with recognition. "Borislav," she murmured. The honey badger snuffled at her boots, then sat back on its haunches, waiting. He was heavier now, his shoulders scarred from old battles, but still moved with that restless, coiled energy that made him more dangerous than most soldiers. She knelt, resting a hand on his head. They took the kids. Borislav's ears twitched. They think they can keep them. She reached for the sidearm, feeling the weight settle into her palm like it had never left. The honey badger's lips peeled back in a silent snarl. Yelena strapped the armor to her chest, piece by piece, each click and lock sounding like a promise. The air outside had cooled. The sun's edge dipped toward the jagged hills. Somewhere beyond them, in the belly of a warship, her children waited, or were already being stripped of the life they knew. She closed the steel case, slung the sidearm, and clipped the knife to her belt. Borislav patted at her heels as she stepped into the fading light. "They should have killed me," she said quietly, not to the honey badger, not to herself, but to the empty sky. Then she started walking. Yelena moved like a shadow through the skeletal remains of the outpost. The place had been abandoned for months, its outer barricades rusted through, but she knew the corridors well enough to avoid the structural weak points. Borislav padded beside her, his claws clicking softly on the metal decking, nose twitching at every trace scent. She had stashed gear here long before she'd tried to bury her past, and now she would take it all back. A crate lay where she had hidden it beneath a collapsed scaffolding. She brushed away dust and pried the lid open. Inside were tools no settler would own: lock breakers, a microfusion welder, and a disassembled pulse carbine of human make. She ran her fingers over the weapon's barrel, remembering the feel of recoil, the disciplined rhythm of combat. Her jaw tightened. This was not the gear of a farmer. It was the gear of a hunter. They had taken her children, and the Galactic Armies did not return their prey. She needed more than anger to get them back. She needed information, contacts, transport, and she knew where to start. 2 days later, she stepped into the largest smuggler hub in the sector, a dockyard carved into the side of a moon riddled with market stalls and neon-lit bars. The air was thick with the stench of recycled atmosphere, spiced liquor, and hot metal. Traders hawked alien narcotics beside crates of stolen weapons. Every glance that followed her was calculating, weighing threat against opportunity. Borislav drew stares. Few in this part of the galaxy had seen a honey badger, and fewer still would walk unflinching beside one. The animal's amber eyes swept the crowd, and one overly curious scavenger thought better of reaching toward him. Yelena found the one face she recognized in the maze of vendors, an aging man with half his skull replaced by a crude cybernetic plate. Raul had been a fence back when she still took contracts. He had a reputation for discretion and for selling information as easily as he moved goods. He looked up from his counter of dismantled drone parts, his cybernetic eye focusing with a faint hum. "Markova, you're either desperate or suicidal to walk in here." "I need a location," she said. "Children, taken by the Galactic Armies. Sector range from here to Viral Gate." Raul leaned back, folding his arms. "That kind of information doesn't come free, and it doesn't come cheap. I'm not asking for cheap." She dropped a pouch of gleaming crystals onto the counter. The rare mineral clinked against the metal, catching the blue light overhead. "I'm asking for fast." Raul studied her a moment longer before taking the pouch. Word is they've been gathering human juveniles for something bigger than the usual integration. A show of dominance, parading them in front of the council itself. She kept her face still, but her pulse kicked harder. Where? War Tribunal ship. Stationary orbit near Asterian's Maw. Locked down tighter than anything in this quadrant. You need clearance or a suicide plan. I have a plan, she said. Ralph's mouth curved in something almost like amusement. Then you'll need a weapon that can cut through their armor. I know where to find one, but there's a catch. There was always a catch. It led her to the fractured remains of a Galactic Armies supply depot on a mineral moon. The outpost had been abandoned after a failed mining venture, but Ralph's intel claimed a garrison still cycled through for refueling and storage. If she wanted a weapon powerful enough to make the Tribunal's guards hesitate, she would have to take it from them. She approached at night, using the jagged cliffs for cover. The depot's lights burned a harsh white, spilling across the landing pads. 2 transports sat in the open, guarded by squads in gold-trimmed armor. She counted their patrol intervals, then slipped between shadow and rock. Borislav followed, silent except for the faint rasp of his breath. The first guard she met never saw her. Her blade slipped under his arm joint, and she eased him to the ground before his armor could clatter. Borislav darted past her, vanishing beneath a parked hauler. She heard the muffled yelp of another guard taken by surprise. The animal didn't kill unless she gave the command. He preferred to bite and vanish, leaving confusion in his wake. Inside the depot's main storage, she found the weapon, a long antimatter rifle, its barrel encased in layered alloy to withstand the volatile charge. It was heavier than she remembered such rifles being, but she adjusted her grip and kept moving. She had what she came for, and staying longer meant getting trapped. The alarm cut through the night, just as she stepped back into the open. Patrol patterns had shifted. The bodies had been found. She sprinted for the outer perimeter, rifle slung across her back, Borislav bounding ahead. Energy bolts scorched the rock beside her, but she didn't break stride. One guard tried to cut her off. She dropped him with a shot to the visor, the recoil kicking hard against her shoulder. By the time they reached their ship, a patched freighter she'd bought years ago under a false registry, the depot was in full chaos. She punched in the start sequence, and the engines roared to life. The freighter lifted off under a hail of blaster fire, hull shuddering as a bolt grazed the aft plates. Then the stars opened up, and the depot fell away. She set the autopilot for a drift through the unmonitored corridors of space, stripped off her gloves, and checked Borislav for burns. He shook himself, then curled at her feet, already half asleep. Yelena stared at the antimatter rifle resting against the bulkhead. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a promise, one she intended to keep. The Tribunal ship was still far beyond her reach, but now she had a thread to follow. Ralph's information, the rifle, and her own skill were enough to start. She would need to find a way into Asterian's Maw without triggering every alarm in the sector. That meant a ship capable of running silent, falsifying identity markers, and bypassing a blockade designed to repel fleets. None of it would be easy, but nothing worth doing had ever been easy. Her thoughts turned to her children, not as she'd last seen them, terrified and struggling, but as they were in the quiet moments on Thalen's reach. Her daughter, stubborn in every small task. Her son, fearless in ways that sometimes frightened her. She had taught them to survive. Now she had to prove to them that she could do the same. The NAV console chimed, indicating a new signal. She keyed it open. A scrambled transmission flickered into view. A distorted face, alien, with deep-set eyes and a voice warped by static. "I hear you're hunting the armies," it said. "I can get you onto the Tribunal ship, but you'll have to give me something first." Yelena leaned forward. "Name it." The alien's expression twisted into what might have been a smile. "A prisoner, held in the core ward mines. Get him out, and I'll see to it you walk into that chamber without a single guard stopping you." The transmission cut before she could reply. She stared at the empty screen, weighing the risk. Rescuing a prisoner from a galactic installation would be dangerous. But if the offer was genuine, it might be the only way to stand in that Tribunal chamber and take her children back. Borislav lifted his head, watching her with those unblinking amber eyes. She reached down, scratching between his ears. "We'll need more ammo," she said. The honey badger bared his teeth in a soundless snarl. and Yelena smiled grimly. The hunt was no longer just about finding her children. It was about making the Galactic Armies understand the cost of taking them. She set a course for the Corward mines. The tribunal ship loomed in the viewport like a black crown adrift in the void. Its spires jutted outward, each bristling with weapons arrays, and the central dome glowed faintly from within. Yelena had seen warships before, but this one radiated authority more than firepower, a place meant to pass judgment, not merely wage battle. Somewhere inside that fortress, her children waited under the watch of alien guards who did not know her, but would soon learn. The plan was crude but functional. The alien contact from the mines, an ex-officer named Vor, had made good on his promise. In exchange for the prisoner's freedom, he had delivered access codes and a maintenance window in the ship's patrol schedule. It was not enough to guarantee survival, but it would get her through the first layer of defenses. The rest would depend on precision and speed. She stood in the cargo bay of her freighter, strapping on armor that felt heavier with each plate. Borislav sat nearby, calm but alert, watching her with the patience of a predator who understood the moments before a hunt. She checked the antimatter rifle one last time, then slung it across her back. Every piece of gear had a purpose. Every movement was deliberate. The freighter's engines pulsed once before going cold, and momentum carried it forward into the debris field that ringed the tribunal ship. Dead satellites and fractured hulls drifted in slow arcs, their shadows offering cover. Vor's codes slipped her through the outer scan net without so much as a warning ping. Docking was impossible without alerting the garrison, so she chose a different entry. Her suit's mag boots clamped onto the hull as she and Borislav emerged into open space, tethered together by a single line. The curve of the ship's outer plating stretched around them, reflecting the light of distant stars. She kept her eyes on the airlock ahead, its seal flashing green in response to Vor's override. Inside, the silence changed. The hum of environmental systems filled the narrow maintenance corridor, the air thick with the faint tang of disinfectant. She moved quickly, following the schematic Vor had burned into her mind during their single meeting. Down 2 junctions, through an unmanned security gate, past a row of inert drones waiting for activation. The corridor opened into a wide transit hall, its ceiling high enough to make her feel exposed. 2 guards approached from the far end, their armor gleaming under the lights. Yelena didn't hesitate. The rifle's first shot punched clean through the lead guard's chest plate, sending him sprawling. Borislav darted forward, a low blur of muscle and teeth, hitting the second guard at the knee before tearing into his arm. The alien's weapon clattered away, and Yelena ended the fight with a quick strike to the helmet. They dragged the bodies into an alcove and moved on. Ahead, the architecture shifted, sleek walls curving into a chamber lined with tiered seating. The tribunal itself. The room was half full, alien officials in formal robes seated in arcs that faced a central dais. A towering figure presided there, his robe's gold embroidery marking him as the presiding adjudicator. At his side stood soldiers in ceremonial armor, their weapons more for display than combat, but still deadly. And there, at the base of the dais, were her children. Her son stood rigid, his chin lifted in a defiance she recognized. Her daughter clutched a thin bundle of fabric, one of the last things from their home. For a moment, Yelena's breath caught. Then she stepped forward, rifle raised. The room erupted in motion. Guards moved to intercept, but the tribunal officials shouted for order. The adjudicator's voice cut through the din, deep and resonant. "Identify yourself. You know who I am," she said. Her voice carried across the chamber, steady and cold. "You took what's mine." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembly. One voice, sharp with disbelief, broke the silence. "She brought a honey badger." Borislav growled, the sound low and promising violence. The first wave of guards charged. Yelena dropped 2 before they reached her, the antimatter rounds tearing through their armor. Borislav hit the line like a living blade, weaving between legs, tearing at joints and unprotected gaps. She moved with him, her strikes precise, conserving ammunition. The tribunal chamber dissolved into chaos. She reached the dais steps as a guard lunged from the side. His blade skimmed her armor, leaving a scored line across her ribs. She countered with the rifles, but then fired point-blank. The recoil jolted through her arms. Her children's eyes were wide, but neither moved away when she crouched beside them. "We're leaving," she said, and they both nodded. The adjudicator's voice came again, no longer calm. "You cannot leave this place alive. Your kind does not understand the weight of its actions." Yelena met his gaze. "You don't understand humanity." Before he could answer, she pulled a small device from her belt and thumbed it active. A faint pulse vibrated through the floor, detonators primed in the maintenance corridors she had passed through. They were her guarantee against pursuit. She started for the nearest exit, her children between her and Borislav. The tribunal guards regrouped at the far end of the chamber, blocking the primary doors. More would be coming from the upper levels. She calculated the path to the auxiliary dock Vor had marked. A slim chance, but better than standing to fight the full garrison. The detonations began behind them, muffled but close enough to shake the walls. Panels buckled, sending fragments raining onto the chamber floor. Shouts rose, and the assembly dissolved into panic. She used the chaos as cover, moving quickly through the side passages. Borislav stayed at her flank, his eyes fixed ahead, his movements sharp and deliberate. One more corridor, then a narrow stairwell spiraling down toward the dock. The air smelled of scorched metal and coolant leaks. She could hear the distant wail of alarms and the thud of boots converging from other wings. They were running out of time. At the final landing, a squad waited. Their rifles were already raised. Yelena pushed her children behind her. "Stay down." The fight was brief and brutal. She dropped the first guard with a shot to the neck seam. Borislav tore another from his feet, and the rest fell in a flurry of close-quarter strikes and precision fire. The last soldier's weapon clanged to the floor as he crumpled. They reached the dock. A small shuttle sat prepped for departure, its hatch open as if inviting them. Vor's handiwork, no doubt. He had kept his word. But before they could board, a voice echoed from behind. The adjudicator stood at the far end of the bay, flanked by two remaining guards. His robe was singed, his expression no longer impassive but burning with controlled fury. "You will not escape judgment," he said. Yelena met his gaze across the distance, her rifle steady in her hands. She could end it now, one shot, and the tribunal will be leaderless. But the time she spent aiming could be the time needed for more soldiers to arrive. Her children's safety came first. She backed toward the shuttle, never lowering the weapon. Borislav snarled, muscles tense for a lunge. The adjudicator didn't advance, but his eyes locked on hers as the hatch closed between them. Inside the shuttle, the hum of engines built. She strapped her children in, checked Borislav's harness, and slid into the pilot's seat. The docking clamps released, and the ship drifted free. In the viewport, the tribunal chamber's dome shrank against the stars. The detonators she'd planted were still counting down. When they reached 0, the blast would cripple the ship's lower decks, but not destroy it entirely. It was a message, not an execution. Her children stared at her, questions in their eyes, but she only said, "Hold on. We're not safe yet." Then she turned the shuttle toward the dark between the stars, leaving the tribunal ship burning in her wake. The tribunal ship dwindled behind them, its wounded hull trailing plumes of vapor into the void. Yelena kept her hands tight on the shuttle's controls, eyes flicking between the viewport and the threat indicators. The alarms had faded, but she knew the silence was temporary. The Galactic Armies would not let her escape without a chase. Beside her, Borislav crouched at the base of the console, his breathing slow but alert. The children sat strapped into their seats, still pale from the chaos, their small fingers gripping the restraints. The first signal of pursuit came as a ripple in the comm bands, a burst of encrypted chatter that only meant one thing. She veered toward the shadow of a nearby asteroid cluster, hoping the jagged rock would scatter sensor locks. The shuttle groaned under the sudden turn, its inertial dampeners straining to keep up. Her son's eyes widened, but he didn't cry out. Her daughter's jaw was set, a small mirror of Yelena's own. A flash of light on the starboard side announced the arrival of the first interceptor. Its sleek frame cut through the darkness, wings folding into attack position. Yelena slammed the throttle forward, skimming the asteroid surface until dust plumes rose in their wake. The enemy ship fired, and molten fragments exploded from the rock around them. She needed a way out, and quickly. Ahead, a narrow fissure split the asteroid in two. The gap was barely wider than the shuttle's hull, but it would break line of sight long enough to scramble her trail. She dove for it, warning the children to hold tight. Metal screamed as they scraped through, but the shields held. The moment they cleared the far side, she cut power and let the shuttle drift. In the cold darkness, their ship became another rock among thousands. For several minutes, only the sound of her own breathing filled the cabin. Then, faint and distant, the interceptors swept past, searching elsewhere. Yelena didn't relax. They would widen their search soon enough. The shuttle's fuel reserves were low, and its jump drive was damaged from the Tribunal's initial strike. She would need to reach a freighter hidden in a derelict dock 3 systems away before they caught up again. Borislav shifted, his claws clicking against the deck. She glanced down and saw the dark stain on his armor, small but spreading. The sight punched through her focus, bringing a tightness to her throat. In the chaos of the Tribunal fight, she hadn't noticed the injury. She reached for the medkit, kneeling beside him as the children watched in silence. The wound was a deep gash across his shoulder, likely from a plasma blade. She cleaned it quickly, working with the efficiency of old training. Borislav endured without flinching, only his eyes tracking her movements. When the dressing was secure, he leaned against her briefly before resettling himself near the console. Her daughter spoke then, her voice small. "Mama, will they follow us forever?" Yelena met her gaze. "Until they learn it's not worth it." Her son leaned forward, his voice low but fierce. "Then we make them learn." Pride and worry twisted together in her chest. She had wanted to keep them from this world of blood and retribution, but the choice had been stolen from all of them. Now survival meant teaching them what it took to stand against the armies. Hours later, the derelict dock came into view, a hollowed asteroid barely visible against the dark. Yelena guided the shuttle through its ragged entrance, setting down beside her freighter's battered hull. The moment the clamps engaged, she moved her children aboard and began transferring supplies. The antimatter rifle went into its rack, and Borislav claimed his usual corner near the crew bunks. Before departure, she activated the freighter's long-range comm. The signal she sent was short, encoded, and carried to frequencies she hadn't touched in years. It was a call to the few she still trusted, mercenaries, smugglers, and soldiers who owed her favors or shared her hatred of the Galactic Armies. This was no longer only her fight. When the freighter's engines roared to life, she felt the weight of the next step settling over her. The Tribunal had been a victory, but only a small one. The Council would rally, the armies would tighten their control, and every step she took from now on would push her deeper into open war. The jump drive engaged with a shudder, stars stretching into lines before folding into the swirling patterns of faster-than-light space. The hum of the ship filled the cabin, steady and familiar. Her children sat together on the bunk, leaning against each other. Borislav's eyes were half closed, but his ears twitched at every shift in the engine tone. She allowed herself a rare moment to breathe. Images from Thalen's reach rose unbidden. Her daughter's laughter, her son chasing dust motes in the sunlight, the quiet peace of a home she had thought would last. That life was gone now, burned away by the arrogance of those who thought humanity could be bent into obedience. She wouldn't rebuild what they had lost. She would build something stronger. The NAV console beeped, pulling her back to the present. A message had arrived on the secure channel she'd used. It was text only, no sender identification. 6 words blinked against the dark screen. "We heard. We're coming. Be ready." Her lips curled into the ghost of a smile. Reinforcements meant more than just allies. It meant the armies would no longer be facing one angry mother and her honey badger. They would face something far larger, something they could not easily crush. Still, she knew the cost. Every ally she called would paint a target on themselves. Every strike they made would invite a retaliation harsher than the last. It would not stop until one side was broken completely. The children had drifted into uneasy sleep by the time the freighter dropped back into real space near a nameless moon. It would serve as a temporary refuge while she planned her next move. She set the ship into a slow orbit and powered down the non-essential systems, letting the silence of space settle around them. Standing at the viewport, she watched the moon's barren surface pass below. Somewhere out there, in the labyrinth of the galaxy, her enemies believed they still held the advantage. They believed humanity was small, scattered, and easy to break. Borislav joined her, resting his weight against her leg. She laid a hand on his head, feeling the steady thrum of his breathing. "They'll come again," she said quietly. "And next time, we'll be ready for them." She turned away from the viewport, heading for the comm station. Plans formed in her mind, targets, supply routes, the weak points she could exploit. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was a campaign. In the stillness of the cabin, the only sound was the faint hum of the ship and the slow, deliberate movements of a woman who had been pushed too far. The war had already begun. The Galactic Armies just didn't know it yet.